hey, Chet, baseball seems to be the furthest sport away, I guess, as of yesterday. Today, it looks like they may have made some giant strides getting some of these COVID issues taken care of. Of course, we got labor issues to deal with, but let's try to get the bottom of that as well as the modified Major League Baseball draft that took place this week with Marti Wolever. Marty, welcome back to Philly Pressbox Radio.
Hey, it's great to be back. Thanks, guys.
Hey, Marty, that was Bill. This is Chet. We were going to go right into the draft stuff, but there was some news today regarding the negotiations, which looked like they were almost dead a couple of days ago. Now there are reports that they are closing in on a deal. Nothing specific yet, maybe a 65-game schedule or something like that. Have you heard anything? And, what would it be like playing a 65-game season? Would you be happy with that?
I think at this point, we'd all be happy with anything that they propose. It's just important to get back on the field, I think, for the players, for the organizations, and more importantly for the fans. I think the longer this goes, it pushes more people away from the game, and we certainly don't need that at this point in time.
Yep.
Yeah, and I guess we just had Crystal Rich on talking NBA with us, Marty, and the package that they just came out with the coronavirus protections and all that for basketball. I'm sure baseball is going to be very similar, and getting through all the labor issues has to be one thing. Getting through the coronavirus deal is going to be a whole nother thing.
Yeah, I think there's a few roadblocks, speed bumps, whatever you want to call them, along the way that you're going to have to navigate, and they've done I think a pretty good job to this point in some regards, in some aspects, but there's still a lot ahead of it, a lot of uncertainty that none of us really know for sure. What's going to be allowed and what's not going to be allowed. And, until that time, we just got to get on the field and get this thing moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and hopefully that will happen in the next few days or weeks, and then they'll start playing around July 19th if all goes well. Well, Marty, it was 2 years ago that you were on with us. We talked about a lot of different things regarding, scouting players and all that. This year's draft was just 5 rounds instead of the usual 30. I want to ask, does that make it easier or does it make it tougher knowing that every pick is so important?
A little bit of both. I think it was easier in the fact that you could really focus more so on the players that you had specific interest in and didn't have to spend a lot of time on those that probably weren't going to be a fit within those 150 or 160 players that were taken. So, in that regard, it made it a little bit easier to focus more on those guys, to spend a little bit more time. The downside, of course, was the fact that back in the day, we took a lot of players that were later round draft picks that ended up playing and being big contributors in the big league. So some of those guys did get an opportunity, and hopefully they will here in the next few years when the draft expands back to however many rounds they decide upon.
Well, Marty, the Phils took Mick Abel in the first round with the 15th pick, 6'5", 190, big kid. Without talking specifically about him, what's the risk versus reward of taking a high school pitcher versus a college pitcher?
It's always a great discussion. And in our time in Philadelphia, I thought, from Gavin Floyd to Brett Myers to Ryan Madsen to I can go on and on about right-handers, Kyle Kendrick, that we took that were high school kids. And a couple of those guys were first rounders. So obviously, I think if you look at the percentages, they're probably not in your favor, but nonetheless, I think that's what true scouting is all about. You have to go out and you have to try to acquire the best player that you deem that, at that time. And I thought Brian Barber in his first year did a tremendous job. And I think Abel is, in our view anyway, Abel was the best right-handed high school pitcher on the draft board this year.
Well, speaking of pitchers, sounds like your Marlins, we mentioned you're working with the Marlins now. You got a real good one at number 3 overall, Max Meyer out of Minnesota. One of your colleagues in Miami says that he is very close to being big league ready already. Is that true?
I think so. It's I've been doing this about 37 years now, and I had a chance to see him pitch up in Minnesota in February before everything came down, and it's not often you walk out of a park and you go, that's something that I haven't seen in a long, long time. And that's really how I felt when I walked out after seeing that. It's, I think his stuff certainly could play in the big league level, but there's a lot of other things that go into that. that's a whole different atmosphere than he's used to at the University of Minnesota. But his makeup, everything, all the background that we did on him, I think he's more than capable, and it wouldn't shock me if he did do that.
Wow, that's good. So, hey, Marty, you mentioned how many years you've been doing this. How many baseball games have you seen, by the way?
Oh God, way too many. It's and one year I started to keep a log and like a little diary of different things, and I got into it about 2 weeks, and a lot of writing and a lot of extra work that I just didn't have time for. But no, it's a whole bunch, and enjoyed damn near all of them.
Well, I don't know how much you can speak about another team's player. The Phillies drafted this guy, Casey Martin, in the 3rd round. He's a middle infielder out of Arkansas. I believe some experts say he could end up as an outfielder, though. Do you know much about Casey Martin?
I do. I saw Casey play a bunch last summer, and I've seen him at the University of Arkansas. And I'll tell you, from a pure scouting standpoint, his tools probably are first-round tools in many ways. He can run, he can throw. He's got some power. Of course, the biggest negative was he swings and misses a little bit too often. But quite frankly, I said the same thing about Ryan Howard back in the day. So, and I'm certainly not drawing a comparison there, but I can tell you they had one of their better scouts in Brad Holland, who does the Midwest and does a tremendous job. And they did their homework. And I think it's at that point in the draft, it was a great selection. And if he puts the ball in play a little bit more, I think they're going to be really, really happy with what they did.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about that Carson Ragsdale. He's a huge kid too, 6'8" out at University of South Florida, coming off of Tommy John. Is everybody coming off of Tommy John pretty much these days? Does that really even factor in if they've been able to have any kind of comeback?
It's a factor. I mean, it's in the back of your mind per se, but you're exactly right. It's more commonplace now than it ever has been before. Years ago, if a player had something like that had gone through that procedure, we normally would probably walk by and go to the next healthy guy. But I think it's come so far that many guys have gone through it and have rehabbed and gotten back to the point where they were before, and some even have gotten better with more velocity. So I don't view it as a negative anymore, and I think a lot of clubs are kind of taking an approach that way too.
Hey, Marty, NBC Sports Philly this month has been showing the Phillies' 2008 run through the postseason, culminating, of course, in that World Series title. You were there for that whole era. As a guy who drafted Cole Hamels and was part of the scouting staff when some of the other key guys were selected, how satisfying was that for you, that whole era of Phillies baseball?
I think of it all the time. I love the city. I love the people. And the players on that team. It was really, I think 7 of the 9 on the field at one time were all guys that we had drafted and signed and developed. And so from that perspective, I was really pleased, obviously, what our scouting staff had done, what our player development group had done. And, I can't say enough about, developing your own players and the continuity that they have as they move through the minor league systems, and how they lean on each other and grow together. And it was very satisfying. I mean, I probably in my whole career, I think that was probably the most satisfying thing to see that happen. And quite frankly, it should have happened a couple other times. I thought the 2007, I thought was a learning experience where it was a little bit of an initiation and not unexpected, but we were new to the party. And then after that, I thought the next 4 years, I thought we should have probably won at least 2, if not 3 in those next 4 years. But, things happen but one is great, and it was a great experience.
Hey, Marty, I want to ask you, when a lot of times the farm directors and those guys end up being the odd guys out when new management comes into an organization, how does the direction get passed down into the minor leagues and all from, I guess where I'm going is when Gabe Kapler was here, there was a different hitting philosophy. And that philosophy seemed to get pushed down to the minor leagues, and some guys didn't buy in and ended up gone. Does that come from the manager, the general manager, ownership? Is it a company-wide decision, basically?
I think it varies from organization to organization. And, I was never a big advocate of cloning players and making them all the same, because they bring so many different things to the party, from size to strength to, what their abilities are and what their deficiencies are. So I was never a big advocate of that. I think you have to take the strength of the player and make the most of what they have to offer and move in that direction. So, and there's other people that think there are certain absolutes that have to occur in order for a player to succeed. And I'm not necessarily a believer in that. I think there's exceptions to every rule. So, that goes usually from the top on down, and it filters out through the system. And some people claim success. Again, I never tried to reinvent the wheel. I listened to a lot of great people like Dallas Green and people that have been in the game a long time, and tried to pick their brain. Paul Owen, what succeeded, what made us better, how are we going to do it, and who are we going to do it with? And those all led to, I think, what was probably the greatest run in that organization in a long, long time.
And Marty, among your final few draft picks while in Philly, Aaron Nola and Rhys Hoskins. And the first baseman really struggled the second half of last season. While you don't get to see him all the time anymore, I'm sure, do you have faith that he'll turn it around whenever baseball does come back? Because I like Rhys Hoskins, but he was really awful the second half of last year. What do you think about Rhys?
Yeah, I think he will. And I think he's made right. He's an intelligent guy, great aptitude, and obviously has the physical tools to do it. I think sometimes players put pressure on themselves, and sometimes that comes from up above, sometimes that comes from inside, and sometimes it's both. And as a young player, which he still is, that can grab a hold of you and put you in a tailspin before you know it, and you have trouble digging out. But I have no doubt in my mind that he'll succeed and get back to where he was previous.
How do you like the Joe Girardi hire in Philly, Marty? The Philly fans sure took a quick liking to Joe. He says all the right things that the hard-nosed Philly fan likes to hear. How you like the fit?
You know what? I think you summed it up best. I'd met Joe years ago, and that's it. I met him. I don't know him, but I can tell you just by the way he handles his team, how he handles himself. He represents the city. It's the core of what the city is all about. You work hard, you play hard, and you expect people to do what they're supposed to do and be accountable for what they do. And for me, if you're not, the people in that city can see through it real quickly. And they're going to let you know real fast if it's going to fly or not. And Joe is not going to do that. Joe's going to tell you exactly what he thinks, and he's going to hold those guys accountable, which I think that's all you can ask from an ownership standpoint and from the players you put on the field. I think that's all they can ask and want from their manager.
Marty, Jimmy Rollins' career, you were there for most of that while he was in Philly. I'm more optimistic than other people about J-Roll's Hall of Fame prospects. Do you think he's Hall of Fame worthy, and will he get serious consideration at some point?
You're right. I remember seeing Jimmy in high school when we first started in Philly, and he had a tremendous career. I think he and Chase both are two guys that certainly should be in consideration for a lot of people. Sometimes it goes beyond the numbers, and his numbers, both those guys' numbers are pretty darn good. But I think what they bring to the party and how they lead teams, and I always maintain that when the ball was on the ground at shortstop, it was an out because Jimmy Rollins was going to pick it up and throw it across, and you're going to be out. So, that meant a lot to the club. It meant a lot to the pitchers. It meant a lot to the managers. And I think the swagger that he brought and Utley's, focus, I think both of those guys down the road should certainly deserve some type of consideration.
Fantastic. Well, hey, Marty, we are out of time. We appreciate you coming by to talk to us, and good luck to the Marlins this year, except when they play the Phillies, of course.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's always good to be on, guys. Good luck.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Appreciate it.